grammar. This is a very good school in Australia. He has also introduced what he called the fighting chess index. You can ask David during the lecture if you want. This index provides a comparative metric for the amount of drawing top chess players do. Okay, and today David is going to talk about the really interesting field experiment on discrimination, which is one of the topics that we are going to discuss about the labor market discrimination. Yeah, and okay, without further ado, let's welcome David as he shared insights from his field experiment on discrimination. Please, David.
Thank you very much. I'm a bit of a weird economist. You probably guessed from my profile, because I was a chess player first, yes, but also because in undergraduate, when I was your age, I didn't study economics. I studied mathematics, psychology, and statistics. And only later, after 10 years of working, I quit my job to study economics again. So I come from a non-economics background. And you can see that in some of my work in my profile, that I take economics and I apply it to topics that you don't think about to do with economics. But that's where the value is of your degree. So when you graduate, maybe you'll be an economist. Most of you will not be economists. You will go to other jobs, startups, public service departments, industry, where you will be surrounded by people who don't know anything about economics, and you will have the comparative advantage, those skills to apply. This is one example. Discrimination is a topic that for hundreds of years economists didn't have anything to do with. And only recently, in the last 20 years, we came and we conquered. We brought our skills to provide value. Now, I have a strong Australian accent, so if you don't understand anything, please don't be shy. I won't be offended. Just ask me and I'll try to say it a bit clearer, because I know the Australian accent is also a little bit weird, like my economics profile. First picture, can somebody tell me what movie or movies is this from? I heard someone say it a bit louder. X-Men. Some of you may not know these movies, other people do know these movies. A great Australian actor, very important. I put it on the screen. Hugh Jackman. In these movies, you have these kind of like superheroes with special powers, but the American government and the United Nations put in place some bans. They're not allowed to go to these places. They're not allowed to have these jobs. They're not allowed to do this. They're not allowed to do that. It's a sci-fi movie series, but the theme is discrimination. I put it there just because I like the movies, but it's an example. If this is too old school and you want something a bit newer, you might know this movie. Does anyone know this movie? Wicked. Newer series that's come out. When this was screened in cinemas in the UK, it was different to in all other countries, because in the UK, the government in Great Britain said that before they watch the movie, there must be a trigger warning. And this was put on the screen at the start of the movie, that this movie shows discrimination against green-skinned people and persecuted talking animals. Now this led to lots of jokes made in social media, the Americans laughing at the British and back and forward. But it's another example. The popularity of these movies, incredibly popular. The popularity of these movies, incredibly popular. Even though they're fantasy movies, they have this strong theme that we can all understand from our lives. Now, I'm going to talk about discrimination like I'm an expert, But at some point, I will be talking about the Indonesian context. This is my first trip to Indonesia. What should I know about Indonesia? So I will be asking you some questions, and I will try not to sound like an arrogant lecturer, because you know better than me about these things. Okay, as mentioned...
David, could you use my...
Oh, sorry, I'm so sorry. Please don't tell me I have to start again, do I? Is it okay?
No.
Okay. Sorry for that, thank you very much. So this is me some years ago, you can tell. I work in different fields. The main two broad fields are behavioral economics and development economics. Development economics is a little bit rarer in my university, where we focus more on theory, but is much more common in good universities in developing countries, such as Bulgaria. So you have a lot more development economists here. You don't have as many behavioral economists because behavioral economics is a little bit more theoretical. Behavioral economics is the combination of psychology with economics. That's one way to put it. Another way to put it, you would have already in your studies come across the assumption in classical microeconomics that people are rational. Does that make sense? Have you heard that before? People are rational. They make the best decision with scarce resources, constrained by budgets and so forth. Sometimes these decisions are actually very difficult to make. Like, should you get a credit card? Should you put your money in stocks or the bank or Bitcoin? How are you supposed to make the best decision? Behavioral economics relaxes that assumption. It allows for the possibility that sometimes we all make bad decisions. And sometimes those decisions are predictable. Applying behavioral economics to development economics is very powerful. It gives you some very strong tools to address challenging problems in areas that normally economics never dare to tread in. We'll get to this, but I wanted to start with a simple question for you. If you have an answer, just put up your hand. This lecture is about discrimination, so I should ask you, what is discrimination? You can just say, yeah.
Okay, I think discrimination is like, when you discriminate people, you treat people differently just because they're something that they're, maybe for some people, they're perceived as like different or but like in a bad way.
You treat people differently because they're perceived as being different, and you do it in a bad way.
Yeah,
Is that
like
more or less right?
for example, I personally have like kind of like wavy, more like curly hair, but the way people think that curly hair is like, oh, it's you should make your hair more tidy, more professional. So like I have to, straighten my hair, and I feel discriminated because why? I was born with curly hair, so why should I make my hair straight?
So you feel pressured by society, by others, to change your behavior for something you were born
People perceive me as something bad because something that I was born with.
Great. I'm always impressed by the first person to be brave to volunteer to answer a question as well, so I appreciate it. The hair dimension is a rare one for discrimination, but I've been discriminated because of my hair, so I can completely appreciate that one. Thank you for mentioning it. Thank you for mentioning it. Does anybody else have anything they want to add about what they think discrimination is? We all agree with that? Any other thoughts? That's okay, you'll have plenty more chances or pressure from me to answer questions, so don't worry, there's more coming. Okay, discrimination is one of those strange things where I think we all we know what it is, we feel what it is, But actually, giving a definition is a bit tricky. I thought the definition that the lady gave was very good. It's quite difficult to define it, but you're perceived as being different and generally worse, treated a bit worse, and you feel pressured to maybe change, to conform. But until we define a problem, it's very, very difficult to study a problem. So the economists have given us a very strict definition by two of the experts in this field, Marion Bertrand and Esther Duflo. You might have heard of Duflo being one of the Nobel Prize winners for development economics in 2019. So they just define discrimination as a situation in which members of a minority group are treated differently, specifically less favourably than members of a majority group, and now here's the key point, with otherwise identical characteristics in similar circumstances. That last part, you could also rephrase it for us economists as ceteris paribus. Heard this phrase before? Ceteris paribus, all else being equal. We're very interested as economists in identifying discrimination and explaining it, especially in the labour market, which is what this course is all about. So, here's a little bit of an easier question. What are some dimensions on which people might discriminate? You can't say race because I put race there. You can't say hair because it's already been used. You can come up with something else. Let's go quickly. We can do this quick. Yes?
I think it's gender.
Gender. Very good. Next one. Yes?
Perception of religiosity.
Religiosity. Very good. Yes?
Skin color.
Skin color. Yep.
Disability.
Disability. Okay. We've ticked off the big ones. There's got to be more though. Now we need to think of it.
Stereotype of ethnicity.
Stereotype of ethnicity. Yes. Ethnicity, race, not always the same. Yes. Others? Let's get creative now. I don't believe we're out of ideas. I'm sure we have more.
I think political belief.
Political belief. Very good. Yes. Any more?
Also by the wealthy of a person.
The
Wealthy.
wealth of a person, socioeconomic class. Very good. Yes.
Sexual preference.
Sexual preference. Very good. And we'll talk about that later as well. Yeah, which I know is somewhat contentious for me to come here to Indonesia and speak about, but it's very important. Yes.
Age.
Age. Very good.
It's the most common year.
Is it?
Yes.
I've heard about that actually, and I will mention that in a few slides. I'm glad you mentioned it. We can probably think of a few others. We can get a little bit more creative as well, but that was pretty good. Pretty quick fire. Okay. Now I'm going to talk about discrimination in Indonesia, a topic that I know nothing about. But thanks to ChatGPT, I have some information that I can provide for you. Something that's interesting about Indonesia that I discovered thanks to ChatGPT, is that the legal framework here is a little bit different to how it is in most Western countries that I'm familiar with. In particular, in Australia, we have a Discrimination Act, which more or less by itself self-contains everything you need to know about discrimination law in Australia. Indonesia has a different approach. It's a bit more of a patchwork system which has evolved over time organically and is contained in a whole bunch of different legal documents, some of which don't always match up with each other as far as I can tell. We can go all the way back to the Constitution, which you're probably familiar with, was a little bit vague in how it set things out. It was sort of, let's get it down on paper and we'll work out the details a little bit later. Moving from there, we've got human rights law, and then 2008 is probably the biggest document, legal document that sets out discrimination, but it sets out discrimination in only a few of the dimensions that we have covered so far. Disability is one of them, religion is one of them, but not all the ones that we've already mentioned as a group here. Now there are more laws as well, there are also ratifications of international conventions where it's a little bit unclear how legally binding those ratifications are. But the ILO conventions are the two most there, and disability law. There are also other protections that we don't have in Australia. For instance, menstruation leave, we don't have that one in Australia. And the maternity leave provisions here seem to be, I think, stronger than the ones we have in Australia. But again, it's hard for me to tell from ChatGPT. I don't want to rely on it too much. But here's another question. Why should we care about discrimination? We all think now that it probably exists to some extent, some dimensions. So what? People think other people are different. Maybe they are different. Because the problem is, if we can't work out why we should care, then why should we bother studying it?
Maybe it can be kind of like a source for inequality, especially if we are talking about other macroeconomics.
Okay, great. An answer like an economist. Let's focus on the labour market context. If it is a source that's driving inequality, and we don't like inequality, let's get rid of it. Makes a lot of sense. Any other thoughts before I play the devil's advocate?
Maybe it's about freedom of choice, because in Departemen Economics we learn about freedom, and I think freedom is like the base of our development, and everyone needs freedom to ensure their welfare.
So discrimination is constraining freedom. We need freedom for development, for growth.
For also the welfare of individuals.
Okay. So we're going to factor it directly into the utility function. Then, if I'm going to talk like an economist here, it goes straight in. It's not a mechanism for growth per se. It's more that we need freedom to increase our utility, and it's a constraint on it. Am I saying it right?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So we've got two different perspectives here, both very, very valid points. This one here is more that it's an economic hindrance to an efficient market. This one here is slightly more of a moral argument. It's saying, no, we should bake that directly into the utility function. We need it. And both are very valid, but they're also different perspectives. Now, for a long time, before economists came into the discrimination world, the focus amongst political scientists, social scientists, psychologists, was much more focused on the moral argument that, yes, discrimination is just a fundamental violation of human rights, so to speak. You could see the human rights was one of the legal frameworks I put up there before. Economists, we don't like to wade too much into that human rights business. We're more interested in, are the markets efficient or not? That's all we care about. That's not true. But that's how people perceive economics to be. And if it is a hindrance to something that makes our markets efficient, then we should get rid of it. We've learned about inefficiencies all throughout your first year of your economics courses. And in a very recent working paper, they focused very much on your dimension there, about how much is this causing an inefficiency to economic growth. Has anyone seen the NBER series before? You ever seen NBER? UGM has a working paper series. University of Queensland has a working paper series. This is before papers are published in journals, before they've gone through peer review. The #1 top economics working paper series in the world. It's not the Harvard working paper series. It's not the MIT. It's not the Oxford. It's the NBER series. It's very, very hard to get a working paper published in the NBER series, and if it's there, it's very likely that it's going to land in one of the top 5 economics journals in the world after it's gone through the very, very lengthy peer review process in economics. This one has just been published, hot off the press. And what they've done is analysed, only looking at gender, the inefficiencies on the supply side and on the demand side in the labour market for every country out of 51 countries. And I'm sorry to say, Indonesia is not one of those countries in the list, which is a shame. But we'll talk about maybe if we can get some inference into the implications for Indonesia. By doing so, they've tried to work out, is there a way that we can quantify the productivity distortions of gender inequality across these countries in terms of the GDP lost? It's quite a complex paper. It's quite a fun paper to read. We're not going to go through it here, but I'll show you perhaps their main result. The main result is to come up with this index, and the index measures on the y-axis how much GDP could we get back if we got rid of these labour market gender distortions in our country. The x-axis just tells you how big the country is in terms of its GDP. So you can see a lot of the richer countries sitting over here, less developed countries sitting over here. But the higher up we go, the more GDP we could claw back if we fixed these distortions. You can see, for instance, India, that's about 15% of GDP that could be clawed back. That is a massive amount, just not by digging more minerals out of the ground, not by investing more in technology, just by fixing those labour market distortions. So as economists, we're trying to maximise efficiency wherever we can. Something as simple as gender distortions in the labour market would have massive, massive implications. Okay, but let's take it all the way back from GDP right down to the micro level. The University of Queensland has a beautiful campus, much like your campus here. I've really enjoyed walking around it. I think that this side of the road is nicer than the other side of the road, so I like it over here. I like the BersemIE coffee the best out of the coffee that I've tried here as well. That's where this one comes from. When I walk around the UQ campus, we have one hairdresser on campus, one hairdresser. And this is the sign they have at the front. I don't know if you can read it on the screen here. I'll read it out. Men, $32 a cut. Now, yes, Australia is very expensive, right? That's 320,000 rupees for a haircut, which is a little bit more than this one that I got yesterday, which was 15,000 rupees. It was much better. Women, $35 a cut. Do we think that this is discrimination? Sorry? Paying tax?
Yeah.
What tax?
Like the tax that applied to women's product. If you know, like razor for women is more expensive than razor for men. It's like pink tax.
Ah, so it's a tax on the input costs.
No, it's like the product for, it's like more like slang, I guess. It's popular in media, social media. People say that product for women is more expensive than a man, like their clothes, their razor, maybe like drawing things, like the pink one is more expensive for the girls than the blue one for the boys.
Ah, I see what you're saying, and I completely get this point. However, these products you're talking about are input products for the hairdresser themselves, whoever they might be. And if you come in and I've got a choice, I've got two razors that are identical but they have different colors. I mean, I could just use the blue one, right? And then it should lower your price, right?
Yeah.
So it could be that some of the products that I have to use on a woman, if I'm a hairdresser, are a little bit more expensive. But we don't know until they come in and ask for something, right? We could change the setup. So you come in and we say, do you want the expensive shampoo or the cheap shampoo? This one $35, this one $32. Which one do you want? But we don't do that. We've already set it out straight away by gender. So I'm playing devil's advocate. Do you know this term, devil's advocate? The term means that basically it doesn't mean that I don't agree with you. I'm just trying to argue the opposite all the time, just to challenge you basically. So what are we gonna? So I mean, you should be trying to defeat me in this battle by supporting your classmate. So I've just made my counter argument. Now what? Where's the support?
Maybe generally because women have longer hair than men, so like it takes more effort to cut their hair.
Agree?
So what if the men have longer hair?
Ah, you're on my team. Good. I like it. We're going to be hair buddies, I'm sure. No, but this is, we'll come to your comment in a moment. But what you said there, yeah, very, very similar in a way. You're saying, okay, yes, but let's think about the expected cost function for the hairdresser. The expected cost function, on average, is going to be higher for women. It's going to be a higher cost because they've got longer hair. It's going to take more time. We know that time goes into our labour cost function. So this is a way to try to get close to that expected cost. But the counter argument, which I was going to say, and you beat me to it, very good, is, okay, let's get rid of this. You walk in, don't care if you're a man, if you're a woman. First thing you've got to do is you've got to stand next to this, you know, the height thing. If you want to go on a roller coaster, they have like how high is the child? We'll do that, but we're going to measure your hair. And you know what? We'll even just make it a continuous function. Each centimetre will add on an extra 10 cents, something like that. Would that be fairer?
I think that would be more fair than this generalized price for men and women.
Do you think we should do that? Does it make this unfair? Oh, this is getting tricky. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to do. There is a website called Menti, but if you prefer the QR codes, you can do that. Just make sure you get the right one, okay? Boys on the left, girls on the right. Or if you want to just type it in, you type in menti.com, and you put in this code for boys, the other code for girls. Now, I think I'm going to run out of battery at some point on this, but okay. So now this gets a little bit tricky because I've got to open up a bunch of browsers and I've got to do it in a way that you can't see. So I've got to unplug the computer. So is everyone scanned? Everyone scanned? Because I'm about to unplug. Okay. So the girls one, you can already see it, the girls one. Girls one, you should see a question. Where do you think you're going to rank in the class? Boys, you should see a question. Where do you think you're going to rank in the class? And this is at the end of the semester. For this class, will you be in the top 25% or from whatever it is, number 26 down to 50, or from 51 down to 75, or the bottom quarter? Okay, so that's the first question. Are we all in? Are we all logged in? Did we get in? I'm going to take that as a yes. Okay, so we should all be able to see that question. Now here comes the second question. You should see it on your devices now. It is a simple yes or no, no right or wrong answer. The question is, it is okay for a hairdresser to charge a higher price for women's haircuts than for men's haircuts. Oops, which one's not working? The boys is not working, is that right?
Yeah.
Is it working now? Boys still not working? It's working? Okay. It's quite tricky to do both of the experiments at once, but after this we'll just do a single one which will make it easier. Okay. Okay, has everybody answered? Okay, if you didn't manage to log in, don't worry, there'll be another chance to do this afterwards for different ones. Let's just see what we've got. Okay, so first I'm going to put that first question, the results up on the screen. Hold on. Okay. So this one is the, oh, I can't work out if it's the boys or the girls. Let me work out which one it is. This one is the girls. Okay, so girls, where do you think your final mark will rank in the class? This is what we got. Boys, you said this. Now, I have a question for you. In classical economics, we assume when the rational person makes a decision that optimizes their utility subject to their cost, they have perfectly rational beliefs, which means that the beliefs on average that the class predicts for the future will come true. Yeah, that's rational expectations or self-consistent beliefs. You'll come across this in your future studies, particularly in microeconomics, but also macroeconomics. If this class had rational beliefs, even if some people were randomly incorrect, then what should this graph look like? In other words, what proportion of the class should be in each 25%?
Should be equal.
It should be equal. It should be 25%, 25%, 25%, 25%, because I have the class here. But that's not what we found for the boys, and it's not what we found for the girls either. What does that mean? Can we explain it? Now is this a compulsory lecture? You have to be here today? No. So what's one explanation? That you're all the smart ones.
Because we gain something. Because we gain something from it.
From my lecture? It could be that I'm just that brilliant, that by listening to me for 2 hours, that's enough, that you'll all end up at the top. I like that explanation. Let's do that one. But there's another explanation, which is that you are not a random selection of your class. The people who choose to come to lectures, even if it's some weird Australian guy delivering it, are the sort of people who will choose to do that extra bit of study throughout the whole semester. And they're the ones that on average will end up at the top. However, for the boys at least, that seems to be a pretty big hypothesis to make because we're all over here. Now, also for the girls, we see pretty high overconfidence. This is not confidence in an economic sense. Economic sense of confidence is how close you are to what the reality will be. You can be very, very confident that you will be in the bottom. And if you end up in the bottom, you're right. Yeah? This is overconfidence, when you think you are better than the distribution on average would say. Now, some of these people are going to be right. They're going to end up here, but probably not all of them. And in general, around the world, humans are overconfident, and in general, around the world, boys are more overconfident than girls. Okay, that's where we started. This has got nothing to do with discrimination. This was just to make sure that the program was working. Then we did the second question. Second question, is it okay for a hairdresser to charge a higher price for women's haircuts than for men's? The boys weren't sure. Kind of split, 8 versus 6. And the girls, oops. And, okay, still, there we go. Well, how can we explain this gender difference? Any guesses?
Misogyny.
Misogyny? Misogyny, that's one explanation. What would the economists say? That we choose to believe things that benefit us on average. We choose to believe things that benefit us on average. Okay, that was the first experiment that we're going to do, not a real experiment, but a sort of experiment we're going to do. From now on, I'm not going to break you up into two, we're just going to do it together as a class. No more gender division. I don't want to make discrimination worse than it is in this course, okay? But I get that similar sort of gender difference even when I do this in Australia. So even though the levels are different, if you do t-tests between boys and girls, you still find it in the same direction. And it makes sense. People, if you're given a choice of kind of a moral stance and you don't have a very strong prior about which one to choose, on the margin, you'll choose the one that benefits you, right? Sort of makes sense from a rational perspective. When we talk about gender bias, quite often, in almost all countries, we'll be talking about women being on average disadvantaged compared to men. And I could give you 100 million examples of that. And I won't do it here, you can think of those yourselves. There are some situations, though, where men are discriminated compared to women. And I'll just mention them just because it's perhaps ones that you haven't thought about as much. It's usually the case in professions that we think are stereotypically more likely female orientated. So childcare workers is a big one. Primary school teachers or elementary school teachers is a big one as well. In elementary school, we can actually see some direct examples of it leading to inefficiencies because in most Western countries, interestingly, not so much in Southeast Asia, but in most Western countries, boys do worse than girls on the language studies, on writing and reading. And the gap is quite large. And what they've found in studies is that most of that gap actually disappears. Boys do relatively better if their elementary school teacher is a man. Part of the reason is a role model effect. You see a man in a position teaching you about how important it is to read and write, you're a little bit more enthused, a little bit more motivated. However, in other studies, they found that for equally qualified candidates to be elementary teachers, men or women, women is more likely to be picked because we think about it as more like a woman's job. So we can see inefficiencies there as well. And of course, the other completely applies to women being discriminated in man stereotypical professions. We can test some of these things in experiments, and this goes to something called availability bias and confirmation bias. And this lecture isn't about behavioural economics, but these are two of the biggest phenomena in behavioural economics. Availability means if you can't really decide who to choose, say in a case of like which teacher we're going to hire, your brain goes through its memory bank. Who are all the teachers I know, all the primary school teachers? Were they more likely to be men or women? And the ones that come more easily to your mind are women. Okay, I'll choose the woman. We don't do it consciously. It's not a deliberate process. It's a kind of a subconscious process. Confirmation bias is when you've already got a bias. You want this candidate. You don't know why, but you want this candidate. And you make up reasons to confirm your bias. This was a pretty cool experiment where they went to police stations and they said, here are some hypothetical candidates to be the next police chief in a different station. Which one would you choose looking at their CVs, at their resumes? One was a man, one was a woman. One was said to be very good at street smarts. They understood the street, they understood the gangs and how people moved. The other one was meant to be really, really good in exams, top scorer in police chief exams. The way it was an experiment was they kept switching which one was the man and which one was the woman. Now, half of them, the man was the street smart one, the woman was the academic one. The other half, the man was the academic one, the woman was the street smart one. They did this across a whole bunch of police officers, kept doing it randomly. So on average, because the qualifications are the same, you would expect on average man and women candidates to be picked equally, but that wasn't the case. The male candidate was far more likely to be picked. And every time that they made a decision, the experimenter then said, tell me why, give me your justification. if they saw the two where the man was the street smart one, then when they were asked, why did you choose the man? They said, because to be a police chief, it's much more important to understand the street. You've got to understand the people. Pen and paper, it's not a big deal. If they were the one where the man was the academic one and the woman was the street smart, and they chose the man, and they were asked, they said, it's because, like the street smarts, it doesn't count for much at the macro level. You really need to understand things on paper. You need the intellectual. Now, they didn't have this explanation in their head before they made their choice. They made their choice on instinct, and then they confirmed it afterwards. And you can think of many other examples where this confirmation bias comes into play. Okay, now we're going to do an experiment for the whole class. It's not really an experiment in the strict sense. It's going to be you giving me your questions about whether it's okay or not to discriminate on certain dimensions. And it's going to be a little bit, some of the questions are going to be a little bit sensitive, but your answers are totally anonymous, okay? None of us, I don't know which one is answering what. We just want to get a sense of what the class is feeling on average. Okay, is everyone signed in? Yep, okay. I'm going to unplug them. First question you should already see on your screen. It is okay for motorbike insurance companies to charge teenage boys more due to higher accident rates. Can you all see this on the screen? Is anybody not logged in? Want me to put up the code again, by the way? You okay? Okay, alright. Actually, I realised that I can probably show these to you in real time as we go through. Because there's only one. Alright. The class is divided. It would have been interesting if I changed this one to be boys and girls. I wonder what we would have said. But okay, so the class has not got a consensus on this one. We are split as a society, as a mini society. Next one. It is okay for a tech company to avoid hiring workers over 50, citing lower average adaptability. This goes to the comment about age being one of the main forms of discrimination here in Indonesia. So we're leaning a little bit more into the red for this one. Motorbikes, yeah, we want to keep those guys off the scooters. But for this one, doesn't feel quite okay. All right. Ready for the next one? We already got 5 in total. It is okay for a company to avoid hiring women aged 25 to 35 due to the likelihood of paternity leave. Actually, I probably should have changed that age range because that's the Australian average 10-year for having kids, but it's a bit younger here. We don't like this one. This one's wrong. Okay. So now I'm going to, before we go to the last two, being the devil's advocate, so trying to put the other side together, this one, not okay. But boys on scooters, get them off the road. Why? What's the difference? We as a society have decided that there is a difference.
There is a way to compensate it. Like for example, the H1, this is a simplification, but
Sure.
basically people have different pathways to adapt, and even if you age, for each stage, you adapt differently, and then but the voice one, there's no compensation. Like there's no way to like for example the maternal. Okay, you
fact that they do behave more risky.
Okay, I see what you're saying, and just to be clear, I agree with what you're saying. But now I'm going to say things like I don't agree, because I'm trying to challenge you, and that's part of economics. It's so hard, we need to justify every claim we make, every assumption we make, we have to justify it, and I'm going to keep poking you until you justify it, okay? So, I do agree with what you're saying, but to put it another way, let's say that this is riskiness for our teenage boys. And here we have the girls, and here we have those terrible boys. These are the distributions, right? These are the probability density, okay? How would you feel if you're this boy here? How would you feel paying more than this girl here? You feel a bit unhappy, right? You're a safer driver than she is. But because of your gender, you have to pay more. So how can we compensate for it? Well, I could go out and try to get maybe a safety certification. I've done a defensive motorbike riding course or something like that. But that costs me money and time, and why should I have to do it in the first place? It feels unfair. Just because I was born in a certain category, I'm being judged as if I'm the mean of the distribution. Now, this exact same argument would hold if you're a woman who's made a decision that you don't want to have any more children. You've already got children, or you decide you never want to have children, a bit more common in Australia. Here it's more common that you've already had children, you've decided to stop, and yet because of the possibility that someone like you at your age could have more children, you're being told, sorry, no. Now you could have an operation, a procedure that means it's no longer medically possible to have more children. Quite an invasive and expensive procedure, but that would be a credible signal that you could take to your employer. But why should you have to do that? And obviously that's crazy, right? To go around to job interviews and say, I'm applying, here's my CV, and here's from the hospital saying I can't have more kids. No, we don't want to live in a society like that. But my question is, I've just given you two arguments that are fundamentally the same argument. But we decided that these are different. And so, again, as the devil, I'm asking you to tell me why. Why am I wrong?
Discrimination for maternity leave is like gonna end up in like extinction from the population.
Extinction from the population. That's a powerful argument. It's an Elon Musk argument, yes.
But it's not totally.
It's not totally crazy. No, yes. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, by the way. But
yeah, but the mother break is not really like not a problem really. Like if people discriminate the woman, then we're not gonna have any more labor.
if we discriminate the woman in this way, we're going to not have any females coming into the labour force.
And no more children to be a workforce in the future.
And no more children to work for us in the future, extinction of the population versus the scooters. I like that argument. Do we see some sense in that? One way to try to put that argument, to paraphrase it in an economic sense, is with this word. It's a very long word. I'm almost gone over to the slide. Can you see that? Externalities. Women who want to have children and want to work provide an external benefit to society that we as a society value as a positive externality. Boys who, on average, are very, very bad drivers when they scoot around, provide not just a danger to themselves, but a negative externality. And we've decided that this potential consequence is worth imposing a discriminatory tax that may not be perfect, but when we do all the checks and balances, is better than not having it there. Whereas taking that away, in the case of paternity leave, is again, it's not perfect, but on the balance is a positive for society. That's what we as a society have made, and that's what we as a class have decided. Okay, 2 more questions. We don't have Grab in Australia, but I've decided to localise the example. It is okay for a Grab driver to cancel pickups in low-income suburbs due to the risk of fare evasion. We as a class are coming towards a consensus. Not a total consensus, but we are moving more and more towards consensus. Remember the first one was split 50-50. Not a total consensus, but we're getting to a democratic majority. And finally, let me give you the last one, because we haven't touched on this dimension yet so far. We haven't touched on race or ethnicity. It is okay for a bank to charge higher interest for loans to ethnic groups with higher loan default rates. And so this one, landslide victory to the red team. Not okay. However, says the devil, however, can you explain to me in economics terms why this one is definitely not okay, but our poor teenage boys, we think that half of us think it's okay. Why is this one kind of, take it or leave it, and this one definitely not? Yes, please.
The problem is in your question. In Indonesian context, first the Grab one, in Indonesia, the cost of it, you can still go, if you don't have money, there's 2 things. You can still go borrow from your neighbor to pay the fare. And the second one, it's like there's a factor sedekah. Yeah, sometimes in Indonesia, some Grab drivers, in order to attract, law of attraction, in order to attract more money, they give away money in the form of just free ride. And then the second one is the one of ethnicity.
Yeah.
In Indonesia, if that is the case, then the only one who will get loan is only Chinese, because they are perceived as the rich one, or the Batak or the Padang, because they are perceived as very good at money-making things. So the problem is in your it's in the question itself. And the second one is, let's say the question is not a problem. The externalities for that, you presume that a Grab driver will factor in a certain amount of risk. So yeah, they will still go to the low income area, and for the low income area, if you are not available in that low income area, then in general it won't work. The notion of picking up driver anywhere, everywhere, and then the ethnicity is because bank depend on economic growth. If you discriminate on the ethnic thing, then you inefficiency in the economic growth.
Okay, thanks for your answer. And you know, it's very courageous to try to provide explanations for these things. So I appreciate it. I appreciate your answer. I'm going to obviously come back at you as the devil, of course. But it's quite interesting you mentioned about the Grab drivers. There's obviously some contextual features that I don't understand yet. No Grab driver has given me a free ride yet. So I'll have to ask them about this to see if I can get one. But I'm going to go to some of the things that you mentioned, which some of you might also have been thinking about in your heads as well, which is about factoring in the risk, factoring in the cost. The Grab drivers factor in the cost when they make the choice, and so we should be able to accept that. Well, insurance companies, for each individual case, have a very powerful algorithm that goes through all your demographic characteristics, as well as if you've ever claimed before, as well as your income, as well as all those things, and it will spit out, and the computer doesn't care about discrimination, the computer just spits out the formula and says, this person, charge them 17,000 rupees more than this person, and that's what it says, and that's the profit maximizing decision. But we're not always totally okay with those outcomes. Now, when we get to the bank case, and the bank case is very interesting. You mentioned the Chinese Indonesian ethnicity, and I'm at least aware enough to note that that is probably the most sensitive dimension in an Indonesian context, at least historically, or at least ChatGPT has told me that when we had our conversation about this. And I learned quite a lot about this. But the argument that you gave can also be boiled down to simply profit maximization. You're saying that it's not okay because the bank will lose money. It doesn't. But I don't think that's how most people answer this question. I think when you think about something being okay or not, we're thinking about it in a normative context. Have you done this so far in your degree? Normative analysis versus positive analysis? Has that come up yet? Some nodding, some not so sure. So normative also gives the word for social norms. It's what we think you should do. Positive analysis is nothing to do with feeling positive. Positive just means cause and effect, predicting what will happen. Very much like Sheldon from the Big Bang Theory, someone who just analyzes like a computer, like an AI. Now, I think most people answer this question, given the rich Indonesian history on this particular dimension, in a normative context. You see something like this, you see differential treatment of ethnic groups in the Indonesian context, your instant response is that's not okay, morally. The argument, though, to justify it gets very tricky economically. It's a little bit like the police chief example. You know what your brain and your stomach and your heart tell you is the answer. It's not okay. But now you're trying to come up with an argument afterwards to justify it. And if you say it's not okay because the bank loses money, well, this is capitalism. This is how the free market works. If banks are losing money, they will go bankrupt and drop out. You've seen this in your very first economic courses. In the long run, only the profit maximizing firms will survive. We let them try whatever they want, and if it makes money, they stay, and if it loses money, they go. So why should we interfere? We know that in a competitive market, governments shouldn't interfere because it leads to inefficiencies. Remember the dead weight loss, that little triangle? So let's let them go for it. To be even more concrete, say that I decide to start a bank, a small bank, only a small one, and it only gives loans to that ethnicity that I know has a very low default rate. Small business, small staff, small capital, but apparently, according to this argument, very high profit margins. Is that okay? Or it's not okay? I'm not going to put you on the spot and make you any more uncomfortable than I've made you so far, but I would guess most people would still say it's not okay. It doesn't feel okay to do that. And that's because there is such a rich and deep historical context. And that sort of splintering, particularly on this dimension, which we know throughout your country's history has led to all sorts of violent and often tragic conflicts, could breed large negative externalities. So we've decided it's not okay. All right, I'm not going to make you any more uncomfortable with that. We won't do any more of those quizzes, but thank you very much for participating and for your answers in that. You have to be brave to answer these things. You have to be brave to try to justify them, and I appreciate it. The main takeaway from this is that discrimination is hard. It's really, really difficult to understand what's going on. It's also really difficult to measure. In the early days, economists didn't really know how to measure discrimination. So they decided to do it, like good economists, theoretically. Just by talking about the vague theoretical mathematics for why discrimination could come about. There was a Nobel Prize winner, Becker. We heard about Gary Becker before? He won the Nobel Prize for very, very interesting topics that were close to my heart because they're not traditionally economics. He did the economics of crime in the US. Why do people commit illegal crime? He did the economics of addiction, drug addiction, and he did the economics of discrimination. The first model of discrimination in economics was put forward by Becker, and he said, it's simple, we don't have to change too much in the math that we've already got. All we need to do is to add one more term. That term is a negative, or in the cost function, it's a positive because it's a positive cost of distaste. When we talk about discrimination, we typically say that we don't like that group, we do like this group, so let's just add it in as an extra cost if we hire someone from a group that we don't like. Easy. So, two different CVs, they're otherwise identical. When you're trying to work out who you're going to choose to hire, you're the employer, you try to work out how productive they're going to be, how much value they add to the firm relative to their wages, and if they're from a group you don't like, you just add a little cost into your mental calculations. Now he was focused specifically on race. You can imagine back in the 50s and 60s in the US, this was all they wanted to talk about, race. So why are we not hiring people from the black community? We don't like them as much. We'll just add an extra cost in the function. Done. Easy. That is how we usually think about discrimination. We don't like one group as much as another. But there's a problem with that. You may have seen some of these sorts of equations already in your course. Don't worry, it's not particularly complicated. Firms have got a production function. Production function includes labour as an input, also includes capital. You might have heard of, have you done the Cobb-Douglas production function? Yes, yes, so you've got labour in there, you can probably write the whole thing out with capital as well. But here we'll just assume capital is fixed, and labour is just the number of workers we have from a minority group and a non-minority group. That's where we can hire our workers from. But notice that the input is just the total number of workers because in this model, workers are equally productive. Yeah, there's no difference between a black worker and a white worker in my factory. The cost, however, for a discriminating firm is a little bit different. For each normal worker, normal, non-minority worker, I have to pay them the wage. The wage for a minority worker at the time could be different, but these days it's going to be the same. So you're going to have to pay the same wage. But there is this non-monetary factor for those people from a different group, which is that you don't like them as much. And because you don't like them, it's a cost. This is for our discriminating firm. You could also make this model more complicated. You could have a completely neutral employer who doesn't discriminate, but he owns a factory in Texas and he sells to the public and he thinks, well, I don't care whether they're black or white, but on average my customers would prefer it if the person at the cashier is white. And so that would actually now go into thinking about the demand shifting. The demand of my customers will shift to the left, which is going to hurt my bottom line if I hire black workers. So that's another way to think about it. The end result is the same. The profit, expected profit, from hiring a minority worker is lower than if I hire a non-minority worker of exactly the same productivity. So, easy, done, put it in the model, we don't have to worry, discrimination is solved. Let's move on to other topics of economics. Would be fine, except you might be able to think about this from that previous set of equations. Becker's model violates the absolute fundamental assumption that you studied in your first weeks of economics, which is that classical profit maximizing behavior and agents in the labor market means that the firms that maximize profit stay, the firms that don't maximize profit or have a higher cost function in the long run drop out. So what that means in equilibrium is that there should be no firms that discriminate. Yeah? Because if you're a firm that discriminates, you'll drop out of the market. So if we observe firms that discriminate, Becker's model falls apart. And this very powerful proof by contradiction argument was put forward by Kenneth Arrow, the famous economist, but also by Phelps as well. Arrow, also a Nobel Prize winner, and said this taste-based model, we're not seeing what we should see in the market. It's got to be another reason. Let's think about a statistical explanation for it. Take away that cost function just because you don't like a group, and imagine that you've got to hire between two workers, a black worker, a white worker in America. You've got their CVs. Their CVs don't give you enough information to know for sure what their productivity is going to be. It gives you some idea. You can work out probably who are the really good ones, probably who are the not so good ones. But there's still enough wiggle room that if you're choosing between two, their race provides some sort of useful information, statistical information. For example, we know everything that we could know about scooter riding behavior from our two applicants, a boy and a girl. We can't really work out when they're applying for scooter insurance how good a rider there are. We don't really have those sort of mechanisms. So we use what we've got, which is their gender, and we use our statistics about their gender, and we choose the one who's more productive in expectation statistically. So hiring white workers over black workers with the same CV by putting them into the statistical model is pretty much the same as what we, or at least half the class, said was okay for scooter insurance. Which may be not the sort of conclusion you want to hear, but it's essentially the same sort of argument. So where we land with this is that, well, statistical discrimination is at least a model that it fits with what we observe in industry, that there are firms that discriminate against black workers. Because they exist, this model makes more sense than the other one. Even if we don't morally like it, it at least makes some sort of statistical sense. So we've got two conflicting arguments. The problem is it's very, very difficult to work out which one is correct. And this argument went back and forth throughout the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, with economists not really getting any closer to the truth. The bottom argument here is what I just went through about how Arrow says that Becker's model violates classical competitive market long-run equilibrium behavior. On the other hand, we have a whole bunch of studies from psychology that says that humans, on average, do have a tendency to prefer people of their own kind against people from other kinds. And these psychology experiments, we're kind of not allowed to do them anymore because they're considered to be ethically a little bit dubious. But back in the 60s and 70s, researchers did whatever they want. And the psychologists did these experiments. Some of these you might have heard about before. You might have heard about ones I haven't put here, like the Stanford prison experiment. You heard about that one at all? Where they took average participants and said, you are prisoners and you are prison guards, and then watched them for a week. And after one day, they had to cancel the experiment because of the physical abuse, showing that people, when they're put into a role, start to act like that role. Yeah, we can't do those experiments anymore. Let me tell you about this one, which was very, very famous in the US. This was not done by a researcher. This was done by a school teacher, elementary school teacher, Jane Elliott. On Martin Luther King Day, she decided just herself to run an experiment in her class. Her class walked in and she said, today we're going to do a little bit of an experiment. On the left side of the room, if you've got blue eyes, I want you to sit there. And if you don't have blue eyes, most of the rest of the class had brown eyes, I'll put you over here. And then she proceeded to tell these little kids a lie. She told them that blue-eyed children, on average, weren't as smart as other kids. She told them that blue-eyed kids were dumber, lower IQ. Put them over here. Then she let them choose who they wanted in their group for their group activities, and you could see that none of the blue-eyed kids got picked anymore for the groups. They just stayed in the brown eye. So they were left by themselves. Then she got them to do some tests, math tests. And she knew how they did beforehand. She knew who were the smart kids and who were not so smart kids. And the kids with blue eyes who usually did well, did terribly. They did worse after being told that their kind did worse. Now, the school and the parents didn't know about this experiment, and she got fired, right? But after she got fired, she found a new career kind of as a researcher, discussing this sort of research. There are other ones that you can look up as well. There's many, many examples where participants are put into arbitrary groups, and then some sort of test is played out, or observation, and the group that you are told you belong to, you favour them over the other group. It seems to be something that comes through biology. It's in our DNA. So we've got two models, and it's difficult to work out which one is true. And these two models play out even today. Does anyone know who this is? Seen this person before? Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson. Very well-known personality, professor of psychology, incredibly controversial, but a fantastic orator. When he speaks and when he debates, he is so brilliant that if you look at YouTube, there's a whole series of YouTube videos called Jordan Peterson Destroys Journalists, Destroys Liberal, Destroys Australian Academic, Destroys, you know. If I tried to debate him, even though academically I'm smarter than him, I would argue, I would lose. He's too good. He's too good. I wouldn't go near him. Anyway, he is on one side of this debate, particularly when it comes to gender, and on the other side you've got Iris Bonet at Harvard, who's on the extreme other side of the blank slate perspective. Blank slate, boys and girls, you're born with kind of a blank piece of paper, hypothetical paper, about your preferences. Remember we had differences in overconfidence? When you're born, they're the same. Your risk is the same. Your scooter riding behavior in the future is the same. Everything's the same, but then society, culture, norms, family, friends, tradition come into play, and over time, you're pushed into girls' roles, boys' roles, women's professions, boys' professions. Saying that if we change those social and external environmental barriers, we would have more equitable distribution. Jordan Peterson has a different perspective. Boys and girls are biologically different, not just physically, but also in terms of their risk preferences. For instance, boys are more likely to be risky from birth. It's in your DNA, it's in your code. More likely to be overconfident. They're always going to be worse scooter riders for this reason, right? So we shouldn't get involved too much in trying to get rid of those barriers, because any laws that we pass are not correcting things, they're actually introducing new barriers. The debate continues, but one of the things that makes this debate so tricky in social psychology is a phenomenon called the gender equality paradox. And that is that if you look across country, the countries that are the most gender equal in terms of their laws, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Switzerland, have the biggest difference in gender in terms of industry segregation. All the boys go into these, all the girls go into these. Whereas in countries that don't have this very, very strict gender equality laws, you actually find more equal sorting. Unfortunately, this is just a correlation, but it is the #1 study that Jordan Peterson says whenever he debates these things. It's a correlation, which hopefully you've learned by now in your degrees. In economics, we don't trust correlations. Now, there are ways to try to get to a causal analysis of this. I supervised a student who did his thesis on that, and this is a bit of a tangent, not relevant to the lecture, but what we found is that when you do a proper analysis, control variables, panel data, you don't find any sort of such relationship. But I'm not going to debate Jordan Peterson on this. Okay, so the big problem with the gender discrimination literature is that it's mostly based on correlational studies, old correlational studies, and they can't be trusted. There's very little causal evidence on the effectiveness of any sort of intervention, including affirmative action and quotas. Most importantly, perhaps, for this class, almost all the studies we have been done in so-called weird countries. Have you heard this term before? Weird country stands for Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. Almost always talking about the US, but also throwing in a few other countries like Great Britain, Australia, and Scandinavian countries. It's really not clear why the results from 100 studies in America should translate to a country like Indonesia. So we don't know a lot. One thing we can do is try to run some experiments that are done in the lab, and sometimes they can actually present some weird and counterintuitive results, but they're small samples and they're kind of stylized. They're not real-world behavior. So we don't trust correlations. Has anyone seen this picture before? Oh, one of my favorite. Causal effect, correlational effect. Looks like he's making a difference, but he's not. If you prefer graphs, and of course we're economists, we always prefer graphs. Have you ever seen this one? The age of Miss America correlates with murders in the US by steam, hot vapors, and hot objects. Very, very close correlation. Or my personal favorite, number of people who drowned in falling in a pool versus the number of films that Nicolas Cage appeared in. Very close correlation. He should stop making films. No, of course, these are correlations that we know intuitively have nothing to do with each other. Sometimes we can actually work out why we see correlations. This should say that stop selling ice cream because ice cream is heavily correlated with kids getting sunburned, so we should ban all ice cream sales. We'll probably work out what the missing variable is here. It's the sun. Yeah? So that's easy enough for us to work out. But quite often in our analysis, it's not that easy for us to work out the difference between a spurious correlation, which means a correlation that is really just nonsense, and an actual causal effect. The way to do that is not to ask people, because typically if we run surveys, and many of you will have heard of the IFLS survey, for instance, asking people, oh, okay, and next question after asking you what your household income is, what do you think about Chinese Indonesians? Good, bad, what's your, we can't trust those sort of questions, right? Absolutely not. So how do we do it? How do we test for these things? We need experiments. And this is the methodology of behavioral economics, the go-to. There are also other fields besides behavioral economics, including development economics, where it is considered the gold standard to run what's known as a randomized controlled trial, or a large field experiment. I had a few slides talking about economics experiments. I'm going to leave those and just go straight to the meat of labour market discrimination experiments, so to speak. But I think I'm making these slides available so you can have a read about that stuff if you want, or you can take, I know there's a course on experimental economics here at UGM as well that you should take. So the way that we test for these things, particularly because we can't trust the answers that people give us, is through what's called a correspondence study. It is a field experiment, so it's done not in the lab, but in the field with real employers. And we deceive them. We don't even tell them that they're part of an experiment because we want them to reveal their truthful preferences. The only way to do that is to kind of do it in a bit of a sneaky way. This is not the first correspondence study, but in economics it's the most famous. It's considered the start of this literature. Published in arguably the top economics paper, American Economic Review, top journal in 2004. And the basic setup, it's quite impractical back in the day. They had to get poor research assistant students like yourself to print out thousands of CVs, put one in an envelope with the cover letter and mail it with a stamp at the post office to a certain firm, and do this about 5,000 times. Poor students. But we always had pairs of CVs, identical CVs, where they went to school, GPA, work experience, everything the same. The only thing different in a pair was whether the name sounded like a Caucasian applicant or an African American applicant. Everything else the same. That's the point of an experiment. You keep everything the same, and you only randomly change the thing you care about, the X variable. So here it's race. Of course, they didn't mail both to the same firm. That would be a giveaway. They mailed the pair to different firms. But when you do this thousands of times and you compare the difference, you get a causal effect. How did they measure the effect? Well, they had a phone number there. Call us up. Call me up, please. I'm applying for the job. Call me up for an interview. And they just measured the percentage of callbacks that they got. To do this, and I'm giving you the steps because in case you're interested in the future for your own thesis, you might even want to know the steps to do this. We first need to make sure that these names they came up with were actually interpreted by people as being black or white sounding. So they went to another sample, they gave them the names and said, how likely do you think this is to be a white name? How likely do you think this is to be a black name? And then they chose the top 10 white names perceived to be white, top 10 black names. Step 1. Step 2, get the poor student to send them all out. Step 3, which I'll put as step 2, compare the difference in the number of times you get a call from the firm saying, come in for an interview. When they did this, they can then do a simple t-test to compare between the two. You don't even need control variables because you've randomized, you've kept the CVs the same. And the main result says that on average, a white applicant can expect 1 callback from every 10 applications. A black applicant with exactly the same CV needs to apply to about 15 ads to get that 1 callback. So you can measure, you can quantify the difference. They then went on to do a secondary set of analysis where they said, is it taste-based or is it statistical? Now, this analysis, this was the first time we did a big correspondence study. It was kind of an afterthought. The analysis wasn't very well thought through. So just keep that in mind. But they said, look, if it's taste-based discrimination, we'll expect a larger difference between black and white applicants in industries where you're more likely to actually interact with them, like retail or customer service. In a statistical discrimination, remember statistical, you're using the race as a way to get more information statistically. So if we put more information on the CVs, those pairs of CVs with the most information, there should be lower discrimination because you don't need race anymore. But when they tested the results for these 2 hypotheses, neither came out true. So they said none of the models work. But that's not the end of the story because, like I said, this was more of an afterthought. Now, since then, there have been literally hundreds of correspondence studies run. Because even though it involved mailing a lot of envelopes, the setup is actually very clean, right? Just sending 2 that are otherwise identical and then running a t-test between them. You have the skills already. At your level of your degree, you have the skills already to run this and to analyze it. You may not have the funds to send out that many envelopes yet, but fortunately these days we don't apply for jobs through letters anymore. We do it online, which makes our lives a lot easier. You can do this on all of the dimensions that we spoke about way back an hour and a half ago. All those dimensions have been studied, and you can see some sort of meta-analysis that was done here on this as well. In Australia, there have been a few done, ethnic minorities get fewer callbacks. Females get more callbacks than men in Australia, which is kind of surprising, one of the few countries where that happens. And international students get fewer callbacks as well. But across the board in Australia, the differences are relatively small compared to other countries, and particularly the US and Europe. You'll wonder why I haven't put Indonesian results up there. Out of all the hundreds of correspondence studies that have been done around the world, across all dimensions of discrimination that you could possibly imagine, there has never been one done in Indonesia. Ever. Side note, so here I've got meta-analysis results done by Booth and Lee, and there's another one there. This is in the Australian context. I mentioned this particular slide, not that it will surprise you too much, but it will surprise a lot of Australians, because Andrew Lee is a Member of Parliament in Australia, and before that he got his PhD in economics, before that he was a lecturer. It is really rare in Australia for an academic to become a politician. We don't like academics, we like sports people. You're much more likely to be a politician, which is not so much the case here in Indonesia. So I respect the structure a lot more here. But in Australia, he was voted into Parliament, and one of the first things that he did was to create a new policy evaluation team that doesn't evaluate a policy after it's been rolled out, but evaluates it before you roll it out. So you're the Ministry of Health, you've got a new idea you want to roll out. Maybe it's like this, what's this new nutrition program? What's the food in schools program you've got in Indonesia? You're thinking about rolling it out. It's going to cost however many billions of dollars across the country. Do you do it straight away, or do you go to your team? In this case, you'd go to Andrew Lee's team and say, hey, we're thinking about doing this thing. It's going to cost quite a lot. Can you tell us if it's going to work or not? And his team will run it at a small scale, control groups, treatment groups, measure the effect after 6 months, and then tell you, if you do this, it's not going to work. Or if you do this, it's going to have this sort of effect. This is the dollar value for it, which is a really powerful thing. And he's introduced that into the Australian government. Okay, so as I mentioned, correspondence studies have become increasingly popular because they're very clean analytically to run, and they give you a measure of discrimination which is otherwise very hard to get because you can't just ask people about discrimination. One of the cool experiments they did way back in the day, I don't know if anyone in this room knows what one of these things are. It's been a while. This is an iPod. Remember the iPods? No, you don't remember the iPods. Don't pretend. This was, when this came out, we thought this was the coolest thing ever when I was a kid, because music, a device to play music, didn't do anything else, just did music. That just, it rocked our world because we were carrying around like big cassette players before then. This was an experiment they did on eBay, where they put up pictures of eBay of iPods to sell, so music players to sell. All the text description is exactly the same. They randomized which city in the US they would put the ads, so they put it across different cities, so you in one city, you wouldn't see both of them. The only thing they changed was whether the hand in the picture holding the iPod was black or white. That's it. Everything else is the same. Economically, shouldn't make a difference. The ads where the hand was black, fewer people responded, and when they did put in offers, the offers were lower. So discrimination in the peer-to-peer network for no rational reason. There are many other examples of this as well. I'm just going to mention one more that was done in Australia recently, because this is, for me, kind of quite funny. A couple of researchers at a university in Australia decided to not run the experiment on firms, not run the experiment on people who use eBay, but to run the experiment on other researchers, on lecturers. And what they did was they sent emails pretending to come from students wanting to apply to do a PhD. Dear Professor, read your stuff, here's my CV, I would love to be your PhD student. The only thing they did was change the name of the student from a very Australian sounding name to Middle Eastern name, Indian name, Chinese name, everything else the same. And found that professors wrote back far less often if it wasn't an Australian sounding name. Now, as good, objective, honest researchers, we should applaud this study. And of course, do you think that's what the Australian lecturers did when they found out about it? No. We were up in arms about it, furious, and asked the paper to be retracted because suddenly we were the subjects. It's exactly the same we mentioned about the we're more likely to choose a position on an issue if it benefits us. And so even in this case, even though we use this methodology all the time, as soon as it was done to us as lecturers, we suddenly decided it wasn't okay. Okay, the last thing I'm going to do is talk about a dimension of discrimination that is not very commonly spoken about, obviously, for obvious reasons, in Indonesia, and is not enshrined anywhere in that patchwork of legal provisions that you've got here, and that's sexuality. The reason I'm going to speak about this, though, is not because I want to be any more controversial than I've already been here, but because there is a very, very specific reason why sexuality was chosen in this correspondence study. It's got nothing to do really with the topic of gay people itself. It's got to do with understanding what situations make discrimination more likely, regardless of that dimension. This is a study that I did with a few others in Australia, and it was done on the gig economy. Now, the gig economy, you might know, obviously, you know, Grab and Gojek and so forth, but do you also have platforms in Indonesia where you can advertise for someone to come and clean your house or someone to come and help you put furniture together? Do you have something like that here? You have? Yeah. I think most countries in the world do, and I think, like in the US, they have TaskRabbit, Upwork, Freelancer, all that sort of stuff. There must be ones here in Indonesia, I don't know the context. We posted job ads on there in the gig economy saying, come and do certain tasks for us, mow our lawn, assemble our IKEA furniture, carry out shopping for us, all that sort of stuff. We always had pairs, one where we had two men, one where we had a man and a woman. Now this is probably going to look a little bit strange, but in Australia it's reasonably common to see these sort of photos or see these sort of advertisements in these sort of ads, because we have a large share of the population who are openly non-heterosexual. But we also varied a second treatment dimension. So the first treatment dimension is that dimension of discrimination. Here it's sexuality, but it could have been gender, it could have been race. I'll explain why it wasn't in a moment. And then we also varied a second dimension, which is whether the job was going to be inside our fake profile person's house or outside the house. Now in Australia, most people don't live in apartments, they live in houses. So you have a backyard, you have a yard, you have a front yard, so it could be mowing the lawn outside, or it could be inside fixing a painting on the wall. In the outside jobs, you probably won't have anything to do with the person at all. You come around, you do the job, the money will go in your bank account. The inside job, you're more likely to be physically a little bit closer to them. That's the only difference on that dimension. So we've got 4 types of ads that we would post. And we did this across the big cities in Australia. We always chose one of the 4, and then we had the pair, which is the sexual orientation version in a different city. Because you don't want people scrolling through the ads to get an idea that we're doing an experiment with this. Why would we do this with sexual orientation? Well, in Australia, it's kind of a big deal, and it's enshrined in law. Australia is known as one of the gay-friendly countries in the world. But the most important reason is actually down the bottom here. If I'm the profile, and I am posting this job, and all you know about me, besides the description of the job, is that I'm gay or straight, and you know the price, when you do your mental calculations, nothing about the profile of sexuality should impact into your cost-benefit analysis. You've got the job details, you know how much money there is. It's not like you're hiring a worker. You're going there for a one-off job, mow the lawn, cut down the tree, whatever it is. If I chose gender, if I chose race, if I chose age, you might be able to infer something statistically. Well, if it's a man and he's saying he doesn't want to chop down a tree, it's probably a more difficult job than a woman because men are stronger on average than women. Like, you can do these sort of calculations in your head and you can come up with a statistical justification. The main reason we chose this dimension is it should make no difference for the task that we put up. So if we find a difference in the results, we can say, aha, it's a taste thing. So the good thing about doing this sort of analysis, this sort of gig economy thing where you're actually the profile posting it, is that you don't have to send out thousands and thousands of envelopes. The reason you have to send out thousands in job hiring is because the average callback is so low that to get a statistical difference, you need to send out a lot. Here, if you post a job ad on whatever the Indonesian platform is, you're likely to get a response. Maybe 1, maybe 2, maybe 7, depending on how cheap and easy the job is, right? So you can statistically measure the differences much easier. And on these platforms, it's free to do it. I just wrote a program, sent it through. At some point, the platform worked out what's going on and started banning me. But up until that point, I got all the data that I needed for free, basically. The downside is that it's ethically a bit dubious because I can't tell people, I can't tell the platform that I'm doing it. So the ethics approval is a bit more challenging. But mechanically, it's quite easy to do. So these are the number of job ads that we posted. Whenever you do an experiment, you have a research question, you have your hypotheses, you have your outcome variables, and you specify the test that you're going to do it. And if you do it properly, and you'll need to do this for your thesis, which you'll have to do down the road, you'll have your regression equation, and everything that you need to know before you get the data about how you're going to decide whether your hypothesis is confirmed or not. This is the scientific method. I assume you're fairly familiar with it to some extent, but you're going to have to get more and more familiar as you get closer to that thesis. Here are the main results. If it was posted by a gay profile, remember the only difference is the gay profile will say something like, I won't be home, but my boyfriend will be home to let you in. But the non-gay profile will say, I won't be home, but my girlfriend will be home to let you in. And then all the other text throughout the description is the same, the price is the same, everything else is the same. On average, those profiles got less interest than the heterosexual ones, but the difference wasn't very big. The difference, in fact, between the outside jobs was nothing. The difference between the inside jobs was very big. So that tells us for the first time something about the mechanism. There is some taste-based discrimination that we have. We're even willing to leave money on the table and not do a job that actually benefits us because of that taste-based cost. So maybe Becca was a little bit right. And then we found a few other things as well. All the discrimination is done by men. None is done by women in our setting. It's not really clear what to do with that. Second, when our fake gay profiles did get workers willing to do it, they had lower ratings as well than the workers who were going to do it for heterosexual ones. Okay, what does that mean? It's not really about being gay or straight, although in Australia, that is a bit of a big deal. It's really about there is no statistical basis to explain these results. It tells us that taste-based discrimination does exist in the gig economy, which is getting bigger and bigger, and I know in Indonesia it's now a huge share of the economy, and has far less regulation. All those laws that we spoke about 2 hours ago, a lot of them don't apply as strongly to the gig economy, and there's this hidden discrimination that seems to exist there. More importantly, from a theoretical perspective, or a fundamental perspective, it tells us a little bit about one of the mechanisms of discrimination. It's got something to do with physically being around a group that for whatever reason is different to yours, and that might have big implications in the future. Online businesses, work from home, study from home, and We have no idea at the moment whether this holds for any of the other dimensions, because our study was the first and we only chose one. We have no idea if it holds in any other country. And as I mentioned, out of all the hundreds of correspondence studies, not a single one has been done so far in Indonesia. And you can be the first. That's all I have for you today. Thanks very much. We've got some time for some questions, but I appreciate your attention. Thank you.
Keep applause. Okay, thank you, David. You're sharing very valuable insight on the discrimination on the labor market. And I hope everyone enjoyed the lecture. Yeah. If you have any questions before we close the sessions, yeah.
So I found it interesting topic about discrimination. I think I want to link up with your interest in chess. The thing is that I follow chess, and there's some separate titles for men and women. I think maybe it's very weak because there's no physical appearance that we have. Like you play chess, you're still man. I think like I know some great women chess player. Like in Indonesia we have Irene Iskandar and so many more in group. I think is that fair or just I don't know? Because it's not about profit or it's not about like what Baker says that it's different. But what do you think about it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I could talk about it a lot because I love to talk about chess a lot as well. Actually, it's interesting. I'll have to ask Irene what she thinks about this because she's a friend of mine. I'll ask her what her opinion is. The World Chess Federation covers the sport for about 1 billion players around the world. So it's a big organization, and they have a women's commission. I sit on the women's commission. I'm the only man on the policy decision making on the women's commission. There are basically, I want to give an objective answer. There are 2 schools of thought. And just to give a bit of context, there are different titles you can get in chess, up to Grandmaster. Men and women can get all of these titles. But there are also some special titles that only women can get along the way, including Women's Grandmaster, which has a lower threshold than the men's one. And one argument says, well, why would we do this? It's a purely mental game. There's nothing physical. You're demeaning women's ambition. You're making them not as ambitious by putting lower titles. The other argument says, there are not as many women playing chess as men at all levels. And in fact, it starts off from a young age. If we put age 9, 10, it starts off that women are about 20%, 30% actually in Indonesia. And then over time, particularly around age 18, 17, it's a big drop. And at Grandmaster level, it goes down to 2%. So women do like playing, about 1/3 of the population at girls level, but then they all disappear, particularly around the end of school. And girls-only tournaments stop, because they usually happen in school. And girls have to go now to the adult competitions where there's maybe like 2 or 3 girls and 100 men there. And then it doesn't feel as fun anymore and they drop out. We need a way to incentivize them to stay in, so we have these women's titles to try to keep the participation up. To be honest, there's no causal evidence one way or the other. It's mainly just people shouting on Twitter about it. So I want to stay kind of objective, but it's one of many open questions, and it's actually very, very relevant to not just chess, but to STEM, where we see the same thing, that around the world, in school, STEM subjects up to year 11 and 12, girls around the world in almost all countries do as well as boys. Girls have slightly lower attendance at undergraduate levels, but graduate at very similar rates. And then master's, PhD in the tech sector, you see this huge drop. So it's an open question for chess and for STEM. Any other questions?
One more question.
Thank you. Sorry, I need to ask the question about the case again. This is what the bank is. If we refer to Jeremy Bentham's philosophy of utilitarianism, Bentham said the greatest good or the greatest benefit for the greatest number of people. If Ben charge higher interest rate to several ethnic group that higher risk rather than another ethnic group statistically, is it good for the financial system actually? So the bank in the future can avoid like the liquidity problem or something like a bank run. So in the society, all borrower, all customer in that bank is safe in the future. Is it a good point of view, or do you think it's wrong way of thinking?
So I mentioned before about positive versus normative economics, and one thing that is very, very difficult for us as people to learn, but with an economics degree we will do better than the average person, is to try to stick to a positive analysis, that is a factual analysis. This is what happens, cause and effect, and this is what will happen, rather than normative, which is good or bad, basically. So you ask me whether it's good or bad, and the first thing as humans we want to do is to speak from our, in Australia we say gut, maybe they say heart here, I'm not sure. The hardest thing to do, but you'll learn in your degree, is to extract from that and say, okay, just give me the data and the evidence and let's go from there. So I'm not going to say it's good or bad, but certainly this Bentham approach, the greatest good for the greatest people, a very strong philosophical perspective. There's also the Rawlsian approach, Jonathan Rawls. His approach is look at society from a veil of ignorance. Imagine that you haven't been born yet. What would you like the society to look like if you are then randomly given a ticket? You could be born by this race, this gender, this disability, this age, this whatever else. And if you take that approach, Rawls argues that you should put a lot more emphasis on the worst case scenario, improving the worst case scenario of your society, even if that doesn't increase the average benefit for the greatest population. Now, those are two philosophical perspectives. It's not the economist's job to weigh in. All we're supposed to do is say, if you do this, this is likely to happen. If you do this, that is likely to happen. One thing we know from the history of not just Indonesian politics and culture, but around the world, is that creating division in any form on ethnic lines, even if it might lead to greater economic growth in the short term, is likely to lead to greater negative externalities in terms of political division and human conflict. There's a very, very strong literature about divisions and conflict. And a lot of research has been done by very good economists here in Indonesia looking at ethnic fractalizations when there's been changes to sort of district boundaries. So you can look up that sort of literature. So again, a little bit like your question, I'm not going to give a straight answer, not because I'm a politician, but because I try to keep my feelings out of it and say that our job is just to say, this is what we think will happen if you do X, if you do X1, if you do X2, then something else will happen.
Okay, I think the time is up. So before we closing this session, there are some souvenirs from.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you very much, everyone. Oh, yeah, sure. I realize I didn't answer the questions on the microphone.
Thank you as well for Kisa joining this lecture.